Okay, welcome to week 10 of our Whiteboard Wednesday. This is a continuation of the theme, high performance with high integrity. Last week talked more about some of the issues which relate to the integrity of the organisation, in particular the community. Today I'm going to talk to something which has been this major challenge for the Melbourne Football Club for a long period of time, and it relates to performance, and it's specifically in regard to one of the 7 elements of performance that we talked about, and that's as it relates to facilities. And facilities is obviously a very general concept, but in footy it integrates into all things that we actually do. Quite clearly it goes to the heart of performance in regard to how our players and the type of facilities that we actually provide for them, which has clearly been a significant problem for our club for some period of time, to enable them to elicit a high level of performance from all the development programs that we actually have. But it goes far deeper than that. I thought I'd start with almost a history lesson on the Melbourne Football Club and why this has been such a challenging area. First of all, and I've said it many times before, the Melbourne Football Club grew out of this ground, it grew out of this stadium, the MCG, and that makes us different to every other club who grew out of their suburban facilities, if you like. You got Richmond at Punt Road, you had Collingwood originally at Victoria Park, Eston out at Windy Hill. These sorts of venues, which in many ways become not only a place for them to develop their training bases, but also very strong in regard to their community bases. For Melbourne, up until 1965, it had the MCG to itself, and it was in 1965 that Graham Richmond and Ray Dunnett at the Richmond Footy Club did a deal with the MCC to share the ground. So they shifted away from the postage stamp ground at Punt Road Oval, play at the MCG, and at that particular time the Melbourne Football Club lost its competitive advantage. It was something that Jim Cardwell and Norm Smith, and even before that Percy Page, the Prince's secretaries, was able to, they'd get in their cars and they'd drive up the country and they'd say to players, well, one day, mate, you'll not only, if you come and play for the Melbourne Football Club, you get to play on the MCG. If you play your 100 or so games, you get to become a Melbourne Cricket Club member, and all of these things which came with it. And that was an enormous advantage for the club during that period of time. And there's no doubt in that era it was played beautifully by some of the outstanding administrators that the club had during that period of time. But in 1965 things changed, and then you had another group of people driving up those same freeways, offering fundamentally the same advantage, not with the MCC benefit, but probably with a Gladstone bag full of £1 notes which they'd throw in the air, and they'd ask Dickie Clay or whoever it was to sign before the last one actually hit the ground. So Melbourne actually lost, and in that era where football was going from amateur into professionalism, lost its competitive advantage at that time. But not only that, as the ground was then used not 11 times a year, it was then started to be used 22 times a year during the home and away season as that increased, and then other clubs started to play here, and the MCC rightfully got to become concerned about their showpiece being the ground itself, and all these things changed over time. No longer was football played in quagmires, so not only did the Melbourne Football Club lose its competitive advantage in terms of where it played, but it also had to try and find itself another place to train, and even over time had to find itself another place to socialise. So its sense of ownership of the ground started to slowly dilute, and each of those challenges, and I say to people quite regularly, it was way back in 1985, and I was a young bloke in and around the club at that time, that we moved to the Junction Oval, and it was going to be a 2 to 3 year thing, and here we are 25 years later still training at the same venue, although that is in its final days. So there's a number of elements to it which become very much integrated, not only in regard to the performance elements of it all, which are quite critical, and the bar's just been raised dramatically in the last 10 years, probably started with some of the interstate clubs, and who basically were the first to get this really strong investment in their facilities, starting with the West Coast Eagles many years ago, and Adelaide, and then Fremantle followed, now Port Adelaide. They've got these fantastic facilities, and Sydney and Brisbane also. So what's actually happened now is that the Victorian clubs have now caught up with those, in some cases gone past them, and done so on the basis of some investment outside of their own club. They've been able to elicit government support, both local, state and federal, to try and build these facilities. And again, once again, Melbourne got left behind, and we got left behind because we didn't have our Windy Hill, or we didn't have our Punt Road Oval. We didn't have anywhere where that money could actually be spent, and so we're playing catch up in a major way. But so in regard to that area there, performance, we think we're about to take some important steps, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But I want to talk about one other critical element of it which is also at the core of the actual profit model. One of the very first discussions I actually had was about what actually establishes and creates a profit model in and around clubs, and what enables you to generate this sort of wealth, which then enables you to invest more into your player group and obviously in facilities from a training perspective. And that's become very problematic for most of the Melbourne-based clubs, and it wasn't until really the AFL and the MCC and government all got their heads together last year, and what was a breakthrough moment for the game, that we were actually able to redo the stadium arrangements, which enabled the Victorian-based clubs to catch up with the interstate rivals who had far more control over their stadiums. So the core of the profit model as it relates to stadium is control over assets, and our assets are shared. So therefore, by its very definition, you have less control over those particular assets. So by redoing that deal last year, that become very, very fundamental to certainly our futures, but also the futures of most of the Victorian clubs, and created much more equity in regard to how this enormous economic activity is divvied up after each of the games. So that was a very big breakthrough for us. But the other critical breakthrough for us last year was obviously our realignment with the MCC, because not only did that create the opportunity for a really strong dialogue and narrative with the MCC as to how they play a role in building the Melbourne Football Club, particularly as it relates to the MCG, but it also gave us that great, a much stronger sense of place. We'd gone from being the core group of people in and around the ground to simply being reduced to tenants over a period of 20, 30, 40 years. Well, right now we're with the relationship that we've been able to build in the MCC, we're right in the heart of that club again, and who are the people who quite clearly control the stadium, and that gives our club the type of relationship which can build a positioning over time. So that gives us that sense of identity, as well as obviously hopefully the capacity to generate more wealth over greater control over our facilities.